Hello and welcome to Dharma Podcast, everyone. We are back after a small break. Apologies for that. While the country was tackling external enemies with Operation Sindoor, that all of us were tracking closely and applauding the forces for, a quiet, decisive operation took place parallelly. Operation Kagar, led by the Home Minister Amit Shah, to end Naxalism permanently. And the stated end goal is 31st March 2026. And the forces recently killed 31 Maoists in a most impregnable stronghold called the Karigotala Hills. And this marks a decisive shift towards accomplishing that end goal. So let's bring in Sandeep Balakrishna to talk about Operation Kagar. Sandeep, while, like I said, India was tackling its external enemies brilliantly, internal enemies, particularly Naxals, were tackled brilliantly by the Home Minister and the forces with the recent victory that was announced in the Karigotala Hills. Can we go back a little bit in time and talk about the formation of this operation and what led to this, and essentially bring a refresher on Naxalism itself for the audience?
Yeah, Parag, at the outset, you framed the context almost near perfectly. So, at the outset, Home Minister Mr. Amit Shah deserves all our accolades, all our applause, and for what he has done. A single-minded focus. Operation Kagar is the culmination of a vision dating back to almost 2014. This, I think, is perhaps the best kept secret of the Narendra Modi government. Operation Kagar, like I said, marks a climax of sorts. The climax is yet to come, but this is a decisive semi climax. Uh, but before we kind of get into the historical timeline that led to Operation Kagar and other things, let me tell you a story. So, for the last 2 decades, a guy called Saketh Rajan, not too many people have even heard of his name beyond Karnataka. Even in Karnataka, his name is pretty much faded from public memory. But for the last 20 or so years, Saketh Rajan, and even now, Saketh Rajan remains a folk hero of sorts in the feverish imaginations of the most diehard Naxals or Maoists. So I make no distinction between Naxals and Maoists, but I'll come to that later. So this man, Saketh Rajan, was a hardcore Maoist who was chiseled in the mold of the Naxalbari movement, from where you derive the word Naxalism. And he was chiseled in this pattern, in this mold, since the 1970s. He went by several aliases. For example, Comrade Prem, alias Master, alias Pandu. So this Saketh Rajan, he was eliminated by a anti-Naxal police squad on February 6th, 2005 in the dense jungles of Chikmagalur, right here in Karnataka, about 5 hours away from Bangalore. So that's where he was encountered. And his death also wrote the premature obituary for trigger-happy Naxalism. I say premature obituary because Saketh Rajan was the progenitor of armed Maoism in Karnataka, which had not existed at all since the evolution or the founding of Naxalism. And clearly, the Maoist annals, they still celebrate Saketh Rajan as a fearless martyr, and there is actually a commemorative website in his honor. In those circles, he's kind of a legend. Now, incidentally, Saketh Rajan hails from a Iyengar family from Mysore. I'll return to this point tangentially later as we go on. But from a larger perspective, Saketh Rajan is not merely a Maoist or a Naxal terrorist, but he is a great warning. He is a great symbol of every single thing that is wrong with Naxalism, right from its ideological conception to its eventual extinction, of which Operation Kagar is a big hallmark. And Saketh Rajan's story is also a kind of archetype, meaning it is a symbol of a promising young lad who had potential to become a productive citizen, but he went astray after consuming a toxic diet of hardcore communist literature and after being brainwashed by several warmongering Naxal terrorists who used him as cannon fodder. All these Maoists who die, the so called cadre who die at the hands of police bullets, they are cannon fodder used by the Maoist leadership. Saketh Rajan
Was one of them.
Yeah, one of them. Now, Saketh Rajan's graduation into terrorism did not begin initially. It began with consuming toxic, voluminous amounts of hardcore communist literature, what is known as revolutionary literature, Karl Marx, Engels, Lenin, all these so-called communist intellectuals. But the real brainwashing, the real process of him turning into a hardcore gun-wielding terrorist, that was done sometime in the mid 1980s, and it was done by an Andhra-based violent Naxalite, a terrorist named Cherukuri Rajakumar. He was a leader of the former Maoist terror organization named PWG, or People's War Group. And this indoctrination of Saketh Rajan was done when he was studying at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Delhi.
Oh, is that so?
On its campus and in its hostels and affiliated areas. This fellow, this Cherukuri Rajkumar, back then had a bounty of 10 lakh rupees on his head. Mid 90s, 10 lakhs is a lot of amount. That's more than 10 crores today. He had that kind of a bounty. And after brainwashing, recruitment happened. And as a result, Saketh Rajan became a full-time Naxalite terrorist, like I said. And he quickly rose up the ranks of the militant group. And one of his first tasks was to expand the operations of Naxalism in Karnataka. And he obviously needed resources, which he was supplied. Resources plus young men, students essentially, who were willing to die for the cause, for this misguided cause. So Saketh Rajan went on frequent tours to various university campuses, communist organizations, hostels, and he began to enlist fresh student talent. But Rajan's recruitment at IIMC, it is actually a symptom. It is a symptom of a widespread, a prolonged phenomenon, a dirty, ugly, violent phenomenon, which the smartphone and the social media generation is largely ignorant about. They have no clue the kind of danger that this poses. I'll expand on that as we go along. For more than half a century, our university campuses had become the incubators of left-wing terror. JNU being the most prominent. Jadavpur University, lots of universities like that. And the immediate aftermath of Saketh Rajan's death is even more important because it shows the other side of the same coin. What happened after Saketh Rajan was encountered was that the whole of the so-called humanities department, the academic establishment, colleges, universities, the whole of that, plus so-called progressive writers, authors, intellectuals, and significant sections of the Kannada media, they closed ranks, they stood as one unified body, and they mounted a venomous campaign of intimidation against the then Karnataka Chief Minister, Shri Dharam Singh, the late Dharam Singh. he was not exactly known for his decisiveness, to put it mildly. And so Dharam Singh bowed down to their pressure, and on the floor of the Karnataka Assembly, he uttered some words of praise, applauding the so-called brilliance of Saketh Rajan.
He did.
He did.
In the
It's part of the assembly record. And guess who else mourned the death of this terrorist Saketh Rajan? The late U.R. Anantamurthy. But the most vocal obituary came from the pen of a lady, a deceased lady, known as Gauri Lankesh. This Gauri Lankesh was Saketh Rajan's senior in both Bangalore University as well as IIMC. Okay. And about 7 or 8 months before his death, Gauri Lankesh had entered the deep jungles of Malenadu, or Shimoga, Kudremukh, Sringeri, that region, Malnad. She had entered those deep jungles, and she had done a long and sympathetic interview with Saketh Rajan, essentially supporting his cause, adding fodder to it, glamorizing it.
All of that. The air cover that the overground workers provide.
Absolutely. And later, after his death, this same Gauri Lankesh wrote a long, glowing obituary on the pages of a magazine, an infamous magazine called Tehelka. Okay? I'm just getting started. Like I said, Saketh Rajan's death had rather far-reaching consequences, and his death, in their language, it is martyrdom. It was a perfect opportunity for Maoists, for their affiliated intellectuals, for the whole gang, for the whole ecosystem, to increase temperatures in public discourse and elsewhere. There is an entity named Citizens Initiative for Peace, or CIP. It has no address. It is a post office entity located in Delhi now. Immediately after his death, this CIP jumped into action, and it demanded Dharam Singh to hand over Saketh Rajan's body into its custody.
Into its custody?
Yes.
And what is the locus standi?
I'll tell you. So, this CIP was populated by extremely powerful and influential leftist and NGO activists of the entire spectrum. I'll read out some names. Its prominent members included the late Justice Rajinder Sachar, Harsh Mandar.
This name, I will talk about it.
Mahashweta Devi, Medha Patkar, Aruna Roy, Teesta Setalwad, Ramchandra Guha, the terrorist Sandeep Pandey, Shabnam Hashmi, another Maoist leader, G. Haragopal, Nandini Sundar, who is the wife of Siddharth Varadarajan, and another gun-toting Naxalite named Binayak Sen. Sounds familiar?
Yes,
all these names?
My God.
So they got together and exerted pressure on Dharam Singh. All in the name of what? Look at their names. Citizens Initiative for Peace.
You got to hand it to them.
Okay, it's quite a spectrum, Parag. It ranges and it covers the entire gamut from Maoist theorists to Maoist terrorists. Quite a spectrum, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And some of these people eventually made their way into Sonia Gandhi's unconstitutional body called the National Advisory Council, or NAC.
And that's why I think we keep saying in every second conversation that 2014
2004 to 10,
yeah,
it has been, I don't know how to say it. I mean, it's been a critical decade. Anyway, but this unsolicited intervention of the CIP in Saketh Rajan's case, it brought the Karnataka government down almost to its knees. We should have seen the kind of pressure and the media fuss that was created. Quite incredible. And what is more important is the fact that at that time, the Congress party was in power both in Delhi and Bangalore.
and yet Saketh Rajan was
And
killed.
yet Saketh Rajan, right? Nobody had even heard his name. The larger public had not even heard his name. Look at the clandestine manner in which this subversion happens, Parag. Okay? So this Operation Kagar, like I said, is not just about physically eliminating the Maoists. So I'll come to that. Yeah, you had a question.
No, this media closing the ranks and these powerful people coming into pressure on Dharam Singh. Reports suggest over the last 48 hours, the same media cabal, including the NRAMs and the others, there was severe. They put severe pressure on the center to call off Operation Kagar through the network.
Absolutely.
And I believe they were met
Absolutely.
with a
Yeah,
complete
they were
stony
met.
silence.
They threw their appeal in dustbin and all that. So, but here is another example, another random example of the kind of clout that they wielded. The Columbia Journalism Review is a journal affiliated with the Columbia University, USA. So this Columbia Journalism Review magazine, it prominently mentions Saketh Rajan's name as a victim of the Indian state. Where does his name appear? It appears in an article disguised as a case study related to the to journalistic independence using Gauri Lankesh's murder as a case study. This article was published in 2018
in the Columbia Journal.
Columbia Journalism Review. And the whole timeline is also very important. It reveals many eye-opening truths. You correctly mentioned about, you cited the dark decade of 2004 and 14. That decade was precisely when Maoist terrorism peaked in India in an unprecedented manner. Nothing compares to it, this peaking, nothing compares to it in the last 70 years or so after independence. Let me read out a couple of excerpts from an official report which was published in 2013 by the Ministry of Home Affairs. It was an affidavit given to the Supreme Court. What it says makes your bone chill, Parag. Quote, the frontal organizations of the CPI Maoist operating under the garb of human rights NGOs have kept the Maoist movement alive and are more dangerous than armed cadres. These mass organizations are generally manned by ideologues who include academicians and activists fully committed to the party line. Such organizations ostensibly pursue human rights related issues and also adept at using the legal processes of the Indian state to undermine and emasculate enforcement action by the security forces. They also attempt to malign the state institutions through propaganda and disinformation to further the cause of their revolution. The state governments are required to initiate legal action against the Maoist front organizations in towns and cities. However, initiating legal proceedings against them has often resulted in negative publicity for the enforcement agencies due to the effective propaganda machinery of the CPI Maoist. Close quote. Ticks all the boxes what I just mentioned?
Absolutely.
And the same affidavit also gives us some really damning facts and figures, Parag. It tells us that Naxal influence had doubled in areas under its control. Till the UPA 1 came to power, Naxal influence was negligible. But after UPA 1 came into power, it had spread across 203 districts, spread across 14 states.
Yeah, I believe this is the maximum in the peak,
So there was this famous slogan which basically said that we will carve out a red corridor from Kathmandu to Kanyakumari. And its troop strength had swelled from 7,000 to 13,500, almost double. And its armory boasted of state-of-art killing machines which were supplied through illicit arms trade and drug trade. And it freely extorted money to the tune of 1,200 crores per annum Not only that, it paid proper monthly salaries to its cadre. A parallel government,
Militia
a
government.
parallel economy. Can you beat that? All given cover fire and justification, rescue operations by academics and activists and writers and newspaper editors. And this is how that Home Ministry affidavit concludes, quote, left-wing extremism is pure and simple terrorism. They are prepared to make a common cause with all those who give expression to their dissent through violence. They support everything that negates Indian nationhood. They stand against India's sovereignty, unity, democratic polity, and civilizational values. Close quote. So, what do you think is the reason behind this sudden and frightening explosion of Maoist terror in that decade?
The patronization by the leadership at the very top.
Absolutely. But to get into the nuance, or rather the straightforward answer is this. The first term of the UPA government, it depended for its survival on the 60 Lok Sabha seats that the communist parties had won. Look at these fellows. Communist parties gave unconditional support to Congress, but it was unconditional support, outside support, meaning power without responsibility. This is why, this is a fundamental reason why Maoist terror exploded, on such a frightening scale. And look at what all happened during that decade. There's a flood of dangerous legislations, all left-inspired legislations, which were enacted during both tenures of the UPA. Food Security Act, Right to Education, all of these legislations had Karl Marx written all over them.
And the preposterous communal violence bill.
I was just about to come. In fact, we need a team of honest and objective constitutional and legal scholars to, dissect these so-called legislations threadbare. And they'll be doing a great national service if they take up this kind of project. And the aborted communal violence bill, like you mentioned, is a prime example of the extent to which they had gone.
Scary.
The key element, if you strip off the verbiage from the communal violence bill, the key element is this, the core is this. In any communal flare-up or communal violence, the Hindu community was guilty.
By default, the aggressor
was guilty unless proven innocent. How do you fight this?
The onus was on Hindus to prove.
Yes, a big chunk of this communal violence bill was authored by activists and academics at National Law School, Bangalore.
Another left infiltrated.
Totally. Something else also happened in the same decade. It is no coincidence, Parag, that Nepal, which was the only Hindu country in the world until then, was militarily, violently de-Hinduized during the same period in a violent communist or Maoist coup. Guess who led the coup? It was led by a man, the first Prime Minister of Nepal, a man named Baburam Bhattarai, who was a committed Maoist activist, militant, terrorist, and this man had been indoctrinated at the Mecca of leftism, a place named Jawaharlal Nehru University. You see the links?
Yeah.
It is not a coincidence at all that these things happened during that period. So, yeah. And he also led this. Few people don't know that Nepal faced a decade-long insurrection, Maoist insurrection, for 1 decade, a civil war. It had a specific aim to overthrow the monarchy, a Hindu monarchy. Now, getting back to this Operation Kagar, Amit Shah's vow, his open public declaration, his promise to wipe out Maoist terror, it exudes great clarity when you remember this backdrop. Yes, and at least three generations of countless misguided youth like Saketh, Rajan across India, at least three generations, they have become the unwitting victims of a soulless and a nihilist ideology called Naxalism or Maoism. This ideology is cloaked, it is disguised in the language of justice, emancipation, equality, and utopia. Now, at a very, very fundamental level, when you place this ideology, all such ideologies, on when they are subjected to philosophical inquiry, we find that there is no fundamental distinction separating socialism, communism, Marxism, Leninism, Stalinism, Maoism, and Naxalism. Whatever you call it, there is no fundamental distinction. This ideology is a millenarian, godless religion.
There's no God.
It is an imperialistic, godless, soulless religion, but which is armed with a holy book or two holy books called Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto. And this ideology, from this, it stands to reason that the whole communist organizational alphabet soup in India, it could be CPI, CPIM, CPIML, CPIM-L Naxalbari, PWG, Forward Bloc, Kisan something, CPIML Liberation, all these organizational alphabet soups, they merely differ on the finer points and the tactics and the methods propounded by a very, very clear, a well-established ideology, which also has a very clear and unambiguous theology. The Marxist theology, its devotees regard the Marxist theology as infallible and universal and eternal. So this alphabet soup of various communist organizations, there's a very interesting anecdote, how this works. Way back in 1945, Chinese premier Zhou Enlai, the man who trapped and ensnared and pretty much backstabbed Nawab Nehru, he's a guy. Zhou Enlai, he was giving an interview to an American journalist. And this reporter, he questioned Chow that, sir, whether it is true that Western journalists have painted a false picture of Chinese communists. So what was a false picture according to him? According to him, apparently Western journalists portrayed Chinese communists on equal footing with their Soviet counterparts. So China got communism much later than Soviet. So Chinese communists is equal to, they are like Soviet communists. That was a impression in the Western media. But this journalist says that, I have seen them. The reality is that these Chinese communists are not like Soviet communists, but they are actually radical agrarian reformers. Look at the language.
English.
So Chow listened to him patiently and then he gave a very pithy and a devastating reply. This was a reply. We do not mind what the sons of bitches believe about us as long as the belief helps in our revolution.
Brilliant reply.
So does this explain, my analysis that all these alphabet soups, different organizations, communist organizations, they are cut from the same cloth. Simple. And this same playbook, it has been at work in India as well since the time of USSR, since the time USSR injected communism into India. All communist organizations converge on just one goal, the goal of overthrowing democracy in India.
Through an armed revolution.
That's all. No, methods might be
Methods might
different.
be very different.
The goal is the same.
Goal is the same. Correct.
You do it through writing, somebody does it through street plays. Maoists do it through gun and terrorism. That's all. The goal is the same. Overthrow democracy in India. So, both communist theory and its blood-soaked practice, they all, like I said, they converge on one unanimous ideological core. What is the core? The core basically says that the sovereign nation of India is an illegitimate state that has no business to exist. It has no reason to exist. And this core gives rise to another derivative. It is not a derivative, it is a dogma. The dogma says that India's freedom from British rule was a betrayal of revolution.
Sorry, say that again.
The dogma says that India's freedom from British rule was a betrayal of communist revolution. I'll come to it. In fact, there is a huge volume of records, primary sources, speeches, writings by leaders and their activists. All these records show the communist complicity in sabotaging the Indian freedom struggle at every stage.
Oh, so okay, this explains that statement. Okay.
So they were hand in glove with the British, refusal to grant India freedom, and all the while they were conniving with the imperial colonial British government, thinking that they were furthering their revolution, and a new communist government, will be established, much like USSR and China. So that is why when the British decamped from India, they left India, communists were outraged and they called it a betrayal of revolution. Clear?
Perhaps the only good thing the British did.
Yes. All right. Not only that, there was a general secretary of communist back then, very influential guy named Gangadhar Adhikari. He wrote a notorious thesis which justified the creation of Pakistan, and in fact, the CPI, Communist Party of India, was the Muslim League's best friend. And this dogma, that the betrayal, that Indian freedom is a betrayal of communist revolution, this dogma was the exact trigger for Charu Mazumdar to break away from his mothership, which was the Communist Party of India, Marxist. Charu Mazumdar, as we all know, is the founder of Naxal terrorism. It was founded in 1967. So, this fundamental superstition, communist superstition, that an armed revolution which slaughters millions of your own innocent countrymen will somehow bring in utopia, it has caused the maximum number of genocides in a single century. And history is the best evidence that every time this genocide has happened, every time it has happened, totalitarianism, tyranny, despotism, and not utopia has been the consequence of this superstition in action.
Well said.
And for our audience who wish to investigate this matter in more detail, in great detail, I highly recommend a book called The Black Book of Communism. This was a project of many scholars. I forget the name of the institution which brought out this book, American University. This Black Book of Communism meticulously documents the combined horror of communism, communist genocides in a single century, 20th century. And it's horrifying to read it. And in fact, the communist genocide, bloodbath and mayhem, which was, done in a heartless manner, this genocide is the most closely guarded open secret of left-wing terror in India. None of it has been hidden. And this genocide also includes mass murders committed using the official machinery in states ruled by communist governments, most notably Bengal. The most infamous state-sponsored communist genocide is the Marich Japi massacre, which occurred as recently as in 1979. And of all these Maoist, communist genocides, the Naxalite terror or the Maoist terror is the bloodiest and the most sustained saga of left wing terror. Yet, the beauty of the whole thing, or rather the cruelty of the whole thing, is that Naxal terror has received negligible coverage. It has received next to no commentary. It has received next to no condemnation that it really merits. No body of serious academic research from the non-left has been forthcoming till date. The most brilliant, detailed, and courageous critiques of Naxalism, of communism, has emerged from individual patriotic Indians, starting with Ram Swarup, Sitaram Goel, Arun Shauri much later, Harsh Narayan, nobody knows his name,
Yes.
Devendra Swarup, N.S. Rajaram, Conrad Elst, who is fortunately still with us, and other such stalwarts, all individual people falling outside any non-left organizational framework. And in fact, the RSS and its affiliated entities, they wage their most prolonged and the most pitched battles against communists
In Kerala.
throughout India.
Throughout India.
Most sustained,
Most sustained.
most
And violent.
damaging,
And-
violent battles. Now, which gives rise to a logical question. Why has there been no serious body of research against communist ideology, against Maoism, etc.? What explains this imbalance? The first is the stranglehold of the overall communist, Marxist, Maoist ecosystem, the stranglehold which they had over all avenues of public discourse.
You covered it beautifully at length in the multi-part how Marxists captured and destroyed history, right? It starts with that.
Yes, yes. You know, Parag, the social media generation, the internet generation, doesn't know that there used to be a time when any number of mainstream newspaper editors used to publicly address each other as comrade. At least
Appalling.
at least 60 such editors were directly paid by USSR, planting stories, glorifying communism, Maoism, etc. And they addressed each other as comrade with a dignified air of pride. Most of these fellows are still alive. They're relics.
Even now, I believe
Even
the
now.
editor of TOI is Joydeep Bose.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
similar
yeah,
leanings.
I don't know. I'm not tracking that. So, and then university academics, they regularly invited hardcore Naxal terrorists with bounties on their heads.
To speak.
They invited these Naxal terrorists on their campuses for doing indoctrination, for doing recruitment drives in their war against the Indian state. Saketh Rajan, this is the reason I gave his story, I narrated his story at
And
such
of all the
length.
places, Indian Institute of Mass Communication.
Not of all the places, on such academic bodies or quasi academic bodies. And some of these promising young recruits, new recruits, were directly shipped to the USSR or China for advanced courses.
The other Naxal who was killed, another dreaded founding member, Basavaraj, right?
Basavaraj, yeah, he's the main leader.
He was
a main leader.
He was a student of NIT Warangal.
Yeah. And the second reason why no serious body of communist Maoist critique was able to emerge was the kind of glamorous and elaborate mythology that was woven around Naxalism and Maoism. I mean, this mythology is truly scary, and I mean, it is done with such finesse that it's quite amazing, Parag. This mythology, the main feature of this Naxal mythology was the fact that it fused fiction and non-fiction. You can't beat this. School textbooks, I still remember, school textbooks, they depicted Naxals as selfless, self-sacrificing, impoverished, and courageous warriors against oppression and feudalism. Even today, Parag, just yesterday I was looking at this. Wikipedia, check out a Wikipedia article on Naxalism, only on Naxalism. That article, it peddles a highly sanitized version of the history of Naxalism. Very sanitized. And the combined consequence of all this deliberate and beautiful myth-making about Naxalism was that it gave Naxalism a beautiful halo of heroic romanticism. Naxalism, for ever since it started, Naxalism or Maoism became aspirational among a wide group, a wide class of Indian youth. And these impressionable youth, their greatest goal, their greatest purpose in their life was to become saviors and liberators.
Of an imaginary foe.
And grenades, guns, and landmines would transport them to the promised land. Especially notable in this regard is the Telugu cinema industry. It carved out a separate subgenre, a separate category which is colloquially known as red films.
Red films.
More dangerous than blue films. And these red films had a dedicated audience which would lap up all these movies. And these movies, they also supplied a term of endearment for addressing Naxal terrorists.
What is that?
Annalu, meaning brothers.
Oh.
Brothers who are saviors. And so it is no wonder that almost from the beginning, undivided Andhra Pradesh, it amply supplied several generations of Naxalites and Maoist intellectuals and foot soldiers and violent militant leadership. Some names: Varavara Rao, Kondapalli Sitaramaya, the so-called people's poet Gaddar. He was actually an armed Naxalite. And another dreaded Maoist terrorist named Ganapati, Sitaram Yechuri, he hails from Andhra. And now, the man you mentioned, Basavaraju, his name is also Nambala Keshavarao. He was killed in Operation Kagar. He hails from the Srikakulam district. All this apart, there is a supplementary addition to this, or rather an undercurrent, what you call a subterranean kind of support system in the form of the Congress party, which was for the longest time one of the enablers of the spread of communism in all its disguises. To be more specific, the use and throw policy of successive Congress governments, both at the center and in the state, have been a significant contributor to this steady growth and the encirclement of the Indian state by communism. And Indira Gandhi is undoubtedly the most avid and the most accomplished practitioner of this cynical tactic of using and throwing communists. And we all know the story of how she totally surrendered to communist demands in exchange for her support, in exchange for them giving her support after 1967. And, among other things, it gave Indira Gandhi's support to communists, gave India something called an independent Marxist Republic of Jawaharlal Nehru University.
True.
And
sorry to laugh, but it's true.
This applies, this Indira Gandhi's tactic also applies in equal measure to the late Y.S. Rajashekar Reddy, former Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister. he also executed a similar kind of a tactic in his mad quest for becoming chief minister. And both Indira Gandhi and YSR, they turned against the communists as soon as they captured power. Indira Gandhi, for example, she launched a sustained war against communists around 1981 and 1982. There is a long form article which you can find in the archives of India today. I think it's dated 1982, written by one of the top communist leaders at that time. He's a Bengali, I forget his name, who basically said that this woman, for all the favors that she has taken from us, she is clearly on a war path to make us extinct. Very long form. And likewise, YSR also declared a statewide Maoist manhunt in 2005. He won the elections in 2004.
Greyhounds was formulated
Greyhounds,
not by him, but by the same state.
Greyhounds was a much earlier development. He used them to hunt down Maoists. But by then, the damage, incalculable damage, had already been done. The communist, Maoist, leftist ecosystem, they had proved how incredibly adept they were in strengthening themselves by exploiting every single concession, big or small, that was made by the Congress party. And what the Congress forgot in its unquenchable thirst for permanent power, it had forgotten a simple law of nature. Consequences always outlive and outlast ambition.
Correct. Absolutely.
Now, from there, let's recap. Let's go back again to the UPA era. It was actually the leftist, the NGO, and the missionary nexus that now dictated terms, completely dictated terms to a hopelessly weakened Congress party. And from there, let's fast forward again to 2018. That was the year when India was treated to a rather ugly spectacle. What was a spectacle? It showed Mr. Rahul Gandhi, who was breaking bread with a veteran militant Naxalite, the same man, Gaddar. Now, the proverbial tail was wagging the dog. Make sense?
Yeah, another person was Stan Swami, right? Who again
the whole gang is there,
Yeah.
Parag. Some of these are public. You don't know what happens behind closed doors in those meetings. So, imagine the enormity, the scale, and the extent of this rot when you recall that even Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, he had openly declared that Maoist terror
is the greatest.
was the greatest threat which was eating India away from inside. But guess what? There was little he could do about it. The NAC was more powerful than the Prime
Super
Minister.
cabinet, unelected
Super cabinet, unelected cabinet. And it appeared back then that Maoists had almost perfected the art of using the state's apparatus to usurp the Indian state.
This is, I mean, it can't get more shocking than that.
Absolutely.
To use the state apparatus to overthrow
Topple the state. Right. Now, we can come to the, concluding portion of this analysis. Over the last 10 years, India has become almost unrecognizable, and I mean it in a good way, after the deserved exit of UPA from power. There is a reason why Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah have succeeded in smashing Maoist terror. We can give a couple of data points. This is a formidable team, Modi and Amit Shah. This team has comprehensively, decisively dumped the cowardly charade of engaging in so-called peace talks, of inviting so-called civil society, of using the state's resources to do something called reform of Naxals. This had been the norm for decades. Parag, there is nothing more dangerous than an allegedly reformed Maoist or reformed Naxal. What do you mean reform? They have a battery of lawyers who exert pressure on judges, on the whole, who spin the narrative, painting them as victims, peace and justice and compassion and, misguided youth, this kind of thing. You sustain pressure on all institutions of the state, including government. And they serve light sentences comparably, say for 3 years, 5 years, maximum 10 years. Then they come out and they are rehabilitated in courts. They are rehabilitated by placing them in the same civil service bodies, in NGOs, in universities. And what do they do there?
They can do even more harm.
They have discarded the gun and they've taken up the pen. And they will do the same indoctrination to generations of their students. So reform Naxal, and they don't cut ties with their past lives. No? So they continue the same project of breaking India. And Mr. Amit Shah's approach, beautiful approach, take no prisoners. And as we see, this approach has yielded spectacular outcomes, so to speak. And Naxalism, I think, has been, its presence has been reduced to a paltry, 20 districts or something.
6 is the last data point.
6, is it?
Yeah.
Even more phenomenal. So, in a sense, from a historical perspective, in a sense, Mr. Amit Shah is actually resuming the work of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel.
Absolutely.
Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, K.M. Munshi, even a man named D.P. Mishra, all these people, they were the nightmares of communists in that time, in that period. Naxalism had not yet been born. So communists doubled up both as activists and terrorists. So their legacy, Patel's legacy in combating communist terror, it actually merits a proper, thorough research. Among other things, Patel had kept a tight watch over the CPI. It had not split back then. It kept a tight vigil over the Communist Party of India, and he had published an official dossier published by the Government of India, Home Ministry. The name of the title of the dossier is Communist Violence in India, published in 1949. It is a rather detailed documentation of communist atrocities throughout India since inception. And this work has stood the test of time. It is available in the Home Ministry's archive as a PDF. You can download it. And Sardar Patel, on the side, he had also encouraged public-spirited bodies like the Society for the Defense of Freedom in Asia against their ideological fight against communism. I think some of the founders of Society for the Defense of Freedom in Asia was Sitaram Goel and Ram Swarup.
The usual stalwarts.
Yeah.
Voice of sanity.
And coming back to the present, the Modi government's brilliant offensive against Maoist terrorism, it is not limited only to field warfare like Operation Kagar, etc. Over the last 11 years, see what has happened. Various public institutions, including government institutions, which had once enjoyed a thorough leftist ideological monopoly, they have been systematically defanged. And like India, JNU also has become largely unrecognizable. They call it saffronization. I call it detoxification. And on this front, especially on the ideological front, more needs to be done in this area because, face it, they are trying their best, but reality is that weeding out more than half a century of subversion takes more than one generation.
Easily.
So, Operation Kagar, like you mentioned initially, it closely comes on the heels of Operation Sindoor. I think this Operation Kagar will eventually be recorded, it will prove to be the stuff of legends. We don't know the significance because we are living through it. It happens, it has happened before our eyes. So we are in a way participants and witnesses. So, but by any standard, Operation Kagar is one of the brilliant as well as one of the most underrated successes in combating internal activities of terrorism. And I hope it will be made a case study in the intelligence, defense, and anti terror community. But above all, Operation Kagar clearly marks a decisive triumph against the deadliest enemies of all, the enemy within.
Thank you, Sandeep. While the intent was to bring you in on the recently concluded Operation Kagar, I think the uh, tracing of the Naxal movement that you did for the last 50 minutes or so held me spellbound, and I'm sure as the audience listens to it, will find the same sentiment when they listen to you. I think while you've given handsome accolades to the Home Minister, I think the cleanup of the worst threat to India, which culminated in Operation Kagar, we are witnessing history, like Sandeep said, and I think we all should be proud of it. But more importantly, I think the shift after 2014 into the threat that most of us don't even know because it has escaped all of us in our day-to-day civil lives. I think the history that Sandeep has narrated is something everybody should know about as to what we fought against and what we have triumphed against. So thank you, Sandeep, for bringing all of this to light. Please like, share, and subscribe to the content that Dharma Dispatch produces. And please share the current conversation further. Like I said, to re-emphasize, it believes to be heard by a wider audience. So thank you for your patronage. We look forward to joining you again in the next conversation.